India, the fastest growing economy in the world, and the government has set itself a target of investing $377 billion in developing its infrastructure by 2019. Some of these infrastructure projects include critical infrastructure facilities such as electricity and water supply, waste, water management, transport, information and telecommunication technologies. Due to India's history of vulnerability to terrorist attacks, natural disasters and increasing digital assaults, these critical infrastructure projects are under a constant threat perception. India's economy and its future are tied to its ability to effectively guard its critical infrastructure. It is imperative to bring together the public and private sectors, which act as pillars of support to the critical infrastructure domain. To better understand the challenges and the roadmap ahead, we bring to you a holistic assessment through the prism of security of these assets, the digital future and the private sector implications for India's critical infrastructure risks.
Hello and welcome to this very first episode of India Risk Report, which we will bring to you week on week with very detailed assessment analysis with highly informed guests and experts who are going to look at a number of challenges that India and its economy faces, considering the fact that India and its economy are in the eye of the world, and we in India need to do what we can to make sure that India continues to boom. And we have two eminent experts with us. We have Dr. Vikram Singh, former DGP of Police in Uttar Pradesh, and also a man who's done considerable amount of thinking, writing, and commenting on national security issues, particularly with reference to this subject. And we have Garry Singh, a Special Forces officer, now President of IIRIS, and also a man who has spent a lot of time in the corporate sector in recent years trying to understand the risks, challenges, and the assessments that we need to make to cope with the various dimensions of risk and security. Dr. Singh, sir, my first question to you. How would you, to a layman, define critical infrastructure? Because my understanding is there is physical infrastructure, there's social infrastructure, socio-economic infrastructure, which affects our lifestyle, and there's national security infrastructure, which also comes under critical infrastructure. And for many people, one may mean the other thing, but as a police officer, as somebody who's looked at it, obviously the clear dividing lines.
Obviously, Mr. Raza, it was for the first time that not only in India, but even the US took time to define what critical infrastructure is. It is only after the promulgation of the Patriots Act that USA defined what critical infrastructure is. All assets, physical and virtual, that have an impact on the economy, the health, the safety and the well-being of a nation would constitute the critical infrastructure. It is not only the physical assets, but the virtual assets too would impinge upon the economy and the well-being of the nation.
So Garry, just to take this forward, is there, other than the American definition, because I've also done some reading and I find in a number of areas, the Americans come up with very clear definitions, and these are formally supported by the system, and then they become the guidelines for everybody else to build on. But is the American model necessarily the best case model for India?
As of now, definitely India has got its own dimensions, geographical, social boundaries, limits. So India needs to have its own definition, and these definitions are nothing else but policy statements. Getting them right is as important as implementing any policy statement right as well. So I really go back to definition provided by United Kingdom when they encompass everything else, but they also talk about the personnel who run the critical infrastructure. So not only you need to get your infrastructure, whether physical, cyber, power, energy and everything right, but also ensure the personnel who run it are intact and they are available to run it. Chinese have taken one step further. They even put their research and scientific institutions within the critical infrastructure.
Interesting. So I go to the personal point, because that's a point that you and I were briefly deliberating upon before the start of the show. The thing is that the personnel, to me, is the key, the man on the ground. The problem is that we tend to get so overawed in recent times with technology that we just assume that any guy with 2 arms and 2 legs and given some sort of a uniform can deliver. But I am not very comfortable with that idea. 2, the thing is that there seems to be a huge reluctance in the Indian system that jiska time nikal gaya, but now is my time and my turf and I will do as I please. We are terribly short of well-trained security personnel. There is a huge cache of trained security personnel lying around in the countryside in terms of retired service and police officers. Now, why is the nation not seeking them out to add to our inventory of what we have against these threats? Because these threats, we are not able to comprehend, are multiplying so fast. Classically, cybersecurity threat. You don't need a guy who can do an obstacle course to handle cybersecurity. You need a geek. Now, are you going to be able to raise an army of geek amongst all the youngsters, or all the talent will also go off to Silicon Valley?
So well articulated, Mr. Raza. But the enormity of the problem is enhanced manifold when you see the virtual world and the physical world. And you reiterated that the true wealth of nation are retired and physically fit, mentally fit ex-army officers. It's a huge force, and the best practices the world over, whether it is Israel or USA or anywhere in the world, is to rely upon them. They are indeed the salt of the earth and the true wealth of nation. If we just depend upon them, re-induct them in the system of security, train them, update their IT skills, and if at all we have a possibility, the weapons that are being phased out in the police and in our malkhanas, if they could be armed. This was done in the past as far as the arms were concerned. But as far as IT is concerned, yes, the security pertaining to the IT and the virtual world, they could be trained in the short capsule courses. You very rightly said, our systems and procedures are such that it is ad hocism and firefighting. There is no long-term perspective. And therefore, to have a huge manpower at the district level, the Britishers ensured it by using all police personnel who had retired, the army personnel who had retired, ex-service who had retired, armed them, and they converted mohalla defense societies, village defense societies, and they were a part and an extension of the government. And they came up to the service, and they came up with flying colors. You never had banditry of a type when you had post-independence as it wasn't, because we had a system of ex-police and military personnel who were duly armed and trained by the police and the army to take on.
Very, very strong points there, Garry. And I think Dr. Singh obviously is a man who speaks from his heart. I'd like to touch on one issue he raised, and I think you need to go back to that, is public-private partnership. You see, there is this whole narrative and the notion in the country that I am from the corporate sector, I pay my taxes, the state has to provide me security. I would like to believe that, but the reality is I disagree with it, because the state is stretched. And the state can, and in the era of terrorism, and that's one of the central rules, you need least number of peoples to create maximum number of fear, confusion, and targets. So how do you involve people in public-private partnerships and get everybody to become a stakeholder in protecting our infrastructure, failing which you'll be talking in dark rooms?
This is exactly what is need of the hour, not only for India but everywhere. But allow me to put in one small point before we reach how the public-private partnership takes care of it. I will like to call the critical infrastructure resiliency is very much part of security. We had situations when power grid in India failed. In northern India, there was no electricity for days without having any sabotage attached to it. So when we're looking at critical infrastructure, we have to look at resiliency. So the role of private player even goes more significant. So as of now, any mature economy has mostly private players running the show, and the government is monitoring and auditing function. So in this situation, there are so many interdependency. You want to make your infrastructure work, you need communication, you need telecom, you need electricity. So all these are majorly run by private players. And in India as well, in times to come, you'll find most of the services being handled by private players. So unless there's a great bonhomie and a joint partnership between the public and private, we'll never be able to protect our critical infrastructure. Just a forthcoming point from it, whenever government is providing licenses, I think government needs to put a responsibility attached to it. For example, if your complete telecom structure goes down, the telecom company may be losing revenue, but India can lose a critical capability to respond to a warlike situation, a terrorist attack. So we need to have very much a resiliency attached to it.
Yes, very, very important points raised, and we need to go in for a break, but we'll come back and look at where are India's vulnerabilities and what steps India needs to quickly put in place to ensure that India continues to boom as an economy, but that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two experts with us, and we are looking at critical infrastructure protection, the challenges that India faces, and some very important points have been raised in the first segment. But Dr. Singh, sir, from the top of your head, what would you think are the biggest challenges? I mean, the ones which we really hear about is cybersecurity threat, because it seems to be that if you were to take a step back and look out of things, look at things from outside India, then you think that the only thing India seems to be focusing on is in the IT sector. Yes, there is a great deal of dependence. Everyone is very phone-centric. Everyone is there. But my understanding is we are ourselves responsible for a great deal of our vulnerabilities in how we deal with the e-business, whether it is phones, it is banking, etc., etc. And then there is the governmental e-policies, which are not entirely satisfying from what I hear. My concern is the power sectors, and I'd like your thoughts on the power sector. Garry was elaborating a bit about it earlier, but I know that that is an area which needs a lot more attention and a focused force level, policies, connectivity between every state. We need to be all on the same page on how to deal with the power grid, because energy security is a key to India becoming what we want India to be 10 years down the line.
Very true. And if Fort Knox is not 100% safe, if White House is not 100% safe, we would be living in a fool's paradise if we would presume for a moment that we are totally sanitized. Our firewalls, our systems and procedures to sanitize us and protect us would require constant improvement, constant innovation and upgradation of our skills to the next generation. I will stop at that. But my interaction with the experts in the field would show that yes, we are indeed at par with the best in the world. But as far as hands-on and on the ground level reality is concerned, well, we have miles to go before we sleep. As you very rightly said, there are so many things that we have been able to achieve and able to do, but there is a lot that needs to be done, especially the power sector that is so dependent upon the IT sector. And it is not just the hardware and the software, it is the constant upgradation of the skills and the constant upgradation of the skills of the human capital too, that would require the synergy to perhaps give us a level of satisfaction. Even that would not sanitize us beyond 90%, which is a safety level. But to have a level of complacency, we have to upgrade our skills, our human capital and our IT skills.
Sir, a leading question before I go to Garry. Since you are head of police of a very large state in India, and the police is independent of the centre's interference, and the police really lays down the guidelines for virtually all security issues within the state. Was there in your state, or is there a standard operating procedure across the country in states, that there is a force level that is really dedicated to the maintenance of critical infrastructure projects like power projects and others, just like there is a railway protection force?
We have what is NCIPC, created very recently, YD Section 70 of the IT Act. But in a scale of 1:10, you would desire something around 9.5 to have a level of satisfaction. But the experts say something around 4.5 or something. And again, it requires a lot of reinforcements, lot of research, lot of effort. As far as the police is concerned, there is no doubt there is a cyber cell in every police force. There is a dedicated cyber cell. We have now IIT toppers who have done their BTechs and MTechs in IT who are part of the police department. We have experts. But again, that is just the tip of the iceberg. That is just a drop in the ocean. Lot more needs to be done to have a system and procedure and an SOP that is at least foolproof.
Okay, Garry. Now, very important question for you. And you talked about, best practices abroad and things of that nature. Now, I would like to understand from you that would you say that we have in India today adopted some guidelines which will apply for the corporate sector. Let the government run the government. Let's look at the corporate sector. Let's look at the business and industry. Guidelines and SOPs for critical infrastructure protection. Dr. Vikram Singh just brought out about cyber security. Now, even cyber security, my understanding is a lot of cyber activity takes place in the business environment that you are in, but a lot of it, the foul-ups are hidden for not wanting to show the weaknesses of the companies. Can you spell out bullet points, and we don't have much time, what are the guidelines that you would recommend are crucial for all of us to feel safer and be on the same page?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I think I will say that before even we reach guidelines, there are a couple of points which we need to understand it very well. Right now, India is one geography where the physical security is still a little bit heavier than the cyber or the IT and those system security. But world over, the system security has totally taken over because all your physical controls, whether in terms of surveillance, detections and everything is also using electronic and IT means. So one, we need to understand more and more our dependency on the IT systems is going to go up, whatever part of the country, economy and society you're running. So with that viewpoint, we need to ensure we understand that on the cyberspace, you will never get to know who has attacked you. So when we talk about we need to protect against Chinese and Pakistans and any other country, it doesn't mean anything. Somebody can be sitting in a safe spacecraft and moon can be attacking you. So when that is the situation, which means you need to prevent all possible attacks from all possible directions. So in this, right now, if you look at corporate sector has started putting firewalls and every possible measure at their doorstep, but there is nothing at the country level. So even when government is protecting, they are protecting their own infrastructure. So critical infrastructure doesn't mean government infrastructure. So if you compare it with China and a lot of other countries, they have even those kind of protection that none of the outside China systems can even function.
Very good point. In fact, I was coming to that, and due to shortage of time, we have to go in for a break. But quite clearly, the government is concentrating on protecting itself, but the government doesn't realize that the boom and the push to the economy comes also from outside the government. And unfortunately, some of the guidelines set out by the government in the IT Act do not necessarily take into consideration the sensitivities of the private and the corporate sector. But after a break, to look at finally what are the big ticket areas and the big challenges that India and the Indian industry must be wary of and look at very seriously if India is going to continue to hope to boom the way it does. But that after a break. Welcome back. The last segment of our first ever episode of India IIRIS Report on critical infrastructure protection and the challenges. Dr. Singh, sir, you've been at the helm of a very major police force, but I find that more and more, even in the police, and some of the writings that are coming out by police officers are looking largely at addressing what is more, I suppose, interesting to the ARM audience, which is issues like digital and cyber security. But could you briefly draw a line between digital security challenges and physical security challenges? And within physical security challenges, in a state like UP, where you have abundance of everything from dams to highways to electricity grid to all sorts of natural calamities that could also happen, how do you prioritize?
Right. Agreed that both are closely intertwined. Agreed that both closely interpenetrate each other. Agreed that it is difficult to distinguish one from the other. But obviously, one cannot overemphasize the security aspect of the physical and the digital together. And having said that, I would say that physical would always have a precedence over the digital. And if it comes to budget and prioritizing, the physical assets would require, because we have only one Taj Mahal. We have, like the similar assets, there are only one. The digital aspects of security can be reinforced, improved upon, and also in a manner that it would be appropriate to see that they give a security cover to our vital assets and our critical infrastructure. But the physical part, as I said, that requires constant improvement and innovation, and in a manner that the digital part will also have to be upgraded, the skills will have to be upgraded, and they go in tandem. Because
sorry to interrupt, sir. The biggest challenge, I think, for our security forces and those who are privately also in the business of security, that time for you has been telescoped. You are having to perform at breakneck speed at improving the capability of your staff, including the capability of your assets and your infrastructure, and you have shortage of funds. So where would you go back to the back of the envelope and begin at?
Right, that has a cascading effect. There is no long-term plan, and that is almost like ad hocism and firefighting. There is a shortage of 30% of the force. Yes, our weapons need to be upgraded. Our manpower needs to be trained in the state-of-the-art, both electronics, IT, and other skills. As also, the deployment will have to cater not only just to suicide bombers. Look at the threat that is looming large. The dirty bombs, the biological and the chemical warfare. Have we catered for them? Or we have just catered for a Fidayeen attack? Let us see the whole and the entire picture, and we would realize that perhaps we need to do a lot more than what we are sitting at just now, both in the digital world as also in the physical level.
Garry, do you agree?
Yes, I agree, but at the same time, I do want to provide a new dimension to it. We are no more living in an era when Shri Krishna will give a shank, which will be a start of war. There is no point of incident that will tell India that this is your start of war and this is end. And war is not only a physical aggression. There's economic war, there's a cyber warfare which we are every day fighting with, and even the aggression. What bullets used to fly at border are now flying at our doorsteps. They are in front of office, they are in front of parliament, they are in front of our homes. So war has shifted from borders to our homes. So war is an everyday phenomena, whether it's cyber, economic, or anything else. And in this era, we all need to ensure that we think about it's one problem and we need to be one force to handle it. We cannot continue to operate in silos. I will say even the digital and physical has to come together. At the government level, we expect to set the strategy right, to get the definitions right, do the responsibility allocation right. At the private level, we expect be part of the joint task force and the think tanks which government is running. Come with your ideas. You are doing more innovation than government. Why don't you be there? And for every citizen, we cannot just limit ourselves to be as a culture of security. We need to upgrade ourselves as nature, as security. And that's the DNA change we need in this country.
Yeah, very, very important points brought out. And, I could only say in summary, sir, that, the 3 Ps that normally are applied for security apply here also, that you need to continue to prepare, you need to preempt, and so that you can prevent. Because any attack on any of these sensitive installations and any of these sensitive infrastructure projects could be hugely damaging and have a cascading effect right across the economy. The other thing to understand is that a very good point made by Dr. Singh is that, at the end of the day, we have to understand the physical assets and the physical capability to respond cannot ever be overcome by whatever technology and digitalization you have to do. You've got to have men with feet on the ground and who are focused and alert to the challenges. And finally, and most importantly, and this is not very good piece of news, what comes out of this discussion, that India is not quite there, but it's not really at the bottom of the ladder. But we need to pour in funds, resources, energy, infrastructure, and people's participation if India is going to be secure and become the big economy that we want it to be. Thank you very much for being with us on this show, sir. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.